What would you do if one evening, you walked into your favorite coffee shop, and found your own math professor, a man of immense brilliance and dignity, quietly serving drinks behind the counter? That's exactly what happened to 19-year-old Jada Williams, an underappreciated but gifted student, when she spotted Professor Malcolm Grant, a scholar respected by students but sidelined by arrogant colleagues. And when Jada asked him softly, "Why are you here?" his answer hinted at truths buried deep within the university's walls. What followed would shake the entire campus to its core. But how did one student's voice ignite a movement? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. It was a chilly November evening in the city of Franklin Heights, a town known for its prestigious Franklin Heights University. Inside its ivy-covered buildings, the brightest minds of the state gathered, but among them, not all were treated equally. Jada Williams, a 19-year-old sophomore majoring in mathematics, knew this truth well. A gifted student, Jada had always found comfort in numbers, their precision and logic offering a sanctuary from a world that often dismissed her. But within the hallowed halls of the math department, her talents were regularly overshadowed by her peers, privileged students who believed their wealth or connections gave them a natural claim to success. On this particular evening, after a long and grueling study session in the library, Jada decided to stop by Bean and Birch, a popular coffee shop just off campus. The shop was known for its artisan drinks and cozy atmosphere, and for students burning the midnight oil, it was a much-needed refuge. As she pushed through the heavy oak door, the soft chime of a bell echoed above her. The place was bustling with students and faculty alike. She ordered her usual, a large black coffee, no sugar, and found a quiet corner to review her notes. Her eyes flicked up when she heard a familiar voice behind the counter. It couldn't be. There, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark apron, carefully steaming milk for a latte, was Professor Malcolm Grant. Jada's math professor. The same Professor Grant who commanded respect in the lecture hall with his deep baritone voice and intense gaze. The same Professor Grant who had been mocked by other faculty members behind closed doors for being too old-fashioned in his teaching methods. Professor Grant was well known across campus, though not always for the right reasons. Despite his unmatched mathematical prowess and decades of teaching, many of his white colleagues from elite backgrounds treated him with thinly veiled condescension. Dr. Vincent Aldridge, the newly appointed head of the department, was the worst of them all. A polished, smug man in his late 30s, Aldridge had quickly cultivated a circle of influence, regularly dismissing Grant's contributions as outdated. Other junior faculty members followed suit, eager to align themselves with power. Jada watched in disbelief as Professor Grant worked the register, taking orders with polite efficiency, his signature deep voice now subdued. Why was he here? Her curiosity gnawed at her, but she decided to wait. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. But when she returned 2 nights later, this time with her friend Leah, there he was again, calmly preparing drinks behind the counter. "Isn't that your math professor?" Leah whispered, eyes wide. Jada nodded slowly. "Yeah. Professor Grant." Leah frowned. "Weird. I thought he was, like, some math genius or something." "He is," Jada replied firmly. But even she couldn't understand why a man of his stature would be working a second job at a coffee shop. Word began to spread around campus. It started as whispers in the student lounge, then escalated to chatter in classes. Within days, the department faculty caught wind of it. The news delighted Dr. Aldridge, who saw it as another opportunity to discredit the older professor. During their next departmental meeting, Aldridge couldn't resist making a pointed comment. "I hear Professor Grant's been brushing up on his barista skills. Perhaps the rigor of modern mathematics proved too demanding." Laughter followed. Grant remained composed, offering no reaction. But Jada seethed in her seat. She knew the undercurrent of racism and arrogance running through Aldridge's words. In class, Grant continued teaching with the same precision and dedication. But Jada noticed something different in his eyes, a flicker of weariness, perhaps resignation. The treatment from his peers and now the curiosity of students seemed to weigh on him. Still, his lectures remained brilliant. Theorems unfolded on the board with elegance, and complex proofs became understandable through his patient guidance. Jada's respect for him only deepened. Unlike many of her classmates, children of politicians, doctors, and lawyers, she had no family legacy to lean on. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Jada knew the value of perseverance. And here was a man who, despite all odds and indignities, carried on with quiet dignity. One evening, after another long class, Jada mustered the courage to visit Bean and Birch again. This time, she intended to speak to him. She waited until the rush had died down, then approached the counter. "Professor Grant," she began hesitantly. He looked up, recognition flickering in his gaze. "Ah, Miss Williams. Good evening. I didn't expect to see you here. I mean, may I ask why?" For a moment, there was silence. Then he gave a small, knowing smile. "Life often presents us with unexpected paths, Miss Williams. Sometimes, we walk them quietly." Jada wanted to press further, but something in his tone suggested she hold back. She nodded instead. "Thank you, Professor." As she left the shop, questions swirled in her mind. The truth, she sensed, was deeper than anyone realized. And whatever it wasn't something to mock. Across campus, the gossip intensified. Dr. Aldridge's snide remarks grew bolder. The department buzzed with speculation. But Jada's resolve strengthened. She would uncover the truth, not out of idle curiosity, but out of respect for a man whose brilliance deserved better than whispers and ridicule. And so, the stage was set. What began as a chance encounter in a coffee shop would soon unravel a story that would shake the very foundation of Franklin Heights University. In the days that followed, Jada found herself thinking about Professor Grant constantly. She couldn't shake the image of him behind the coffee shop counter, so different from the commanding figure she knew in the lecture hall. The dissonance gnawed at her. No one should have to shoulder such indignity, least of all a man of Grant's intellect. But the questions only deepened when, during her next math class, a department assistant posted a notice about an upcoming guest lecture series on advanced algorithmic theory, led, unsurprisingly, by Dr. Vincent Aldridge. "Of course it's Aldridge," Leah muttered to Jada as they left class that afternoon. "He probably thinks he's the only one here worth listening to." Jada agreed. The imbalance in the department was glaring. Dr. Aldridge soaked up most of the funding, attention, and accolades, while Grant's classes, though harder and more demanding, remained less popular, buried in the back pages of the course catalog. Students were often advised by their advisors to choose an easier path if they didn't want to risk their GPA. It was an open secret among the black students, especially that certain professors subtly steered them away from Grant's classes, implying they might not be ready for that level of rigor. But Jada thrived under his teaching. Numbers danced in her mind when she left his lectures, and problems that once seemed insurmountable began to unravel with clarity. Still, every time she saw him now, she wondered about the burdens he carried, burdens none of the other faculty seemed to know or care about. Her curiosity drove her back to Bean and Birch one more time. This time, she came prepared. After ordering her coffee, she deliberately chose a seat near the counter, opened her laptop, and settled in for a long evening of studying. She watched as Professor Grant worked efficiently, taking orders, preparing drinks, and cleaning counters. The staff treated him with warmth and respect, a sharp contrast to the chill from his academic colleagues. Hours passed. Near closing time, Jada noticed the manager locking the front door and flipping the sign to "closed." The few remaining customers filed out. Grant remained behind, wiping down tables. Jada hesitated, then approached him again. "Professor Grant," she began softly. "I don't mean to pry. But I don't understand. You don't have to do this. You're brilliant. Grant set down the rag and looked at her for a long moment. His deep eyes held a weight of years unspoken. Finally, he motioned for her to sit. "Miss Williams," he said quietly. "Since you have asked with sincerity, I will tell you this much. The world of academia is not always what it seems. Titles and degrees can hide much, but not everything. In my case, I am here because certain truths must be paid for. And some debts cannot be avoided." Jada frowned. "Debts? But your salary," Grant smiled faintly, "is not what you might imagine. Nor is it always reliable, depending on who holds the purse strings. There are politics. And sometimes, one must shoulder burdens silently, if only to preserve one's dignity." Jada's mind raced. She thought of Dr. Aldrich, of the undercurrents of power in the department. Could it be that the very people dismissing Grant were also making life difficult for him in ways unseen? Before she could ask more, Grant's expression softened. "You are a gifted student, Miss Williams. Do not trouble yourself over my circumstances. Focus on your path. The rest will unfold as it must." But Jada couldn't let it rest. The next morning, she began digging. She visited the university archives, pored over departmental budgets, and spoke to older students. Bit by bit, a troubling picture emerged. A few years ago, after the sudden death of the previous department chair, an older black professor who had mentored Grant, Dr. Aldrich had quickly maneuvered into power. Under his leadership, several senior faculty members found their roles reduced, their funding quietly diverted to new research initiatives led by Aldrich's own protégés. Grant's grant applications were repeatedly delayed or denied, his teaching load increased, and his pay stagnated while others advanced. Worse still, Jada learned through a friend in student government that Aldrich had pushed through subtle changes to department bylaws, allowing discretionary control over certain faculty stipends, effectively punishing those he considered rivals. No one spoke openly about it. Those who tried were politely discredited or marginalized. But the whispers were there, if one knew where to listen. Jada's anger simmered. It was bad enough that a brilliant black professor was being sidelined. But to be forced into working nights at a coffee shop because of financial manipulation? It was a humiliation no one deserved. Yet even as she grew more determined, others noticed her interest. During a study group that week, one of Aldrich's favorite students, a smug, self-satisfied grad student named Peter Langley, leaned over to her with a sneer. "Careful, Williams," he said. "Poking your nose where it doesn't belong. You wouldn't want to make enemies." Jada stared him down. "The only thing I care about is the truth." Peter laughed softly. "Suit yourself. Just don't be surprised when it bites you." The warning only steeled her resolve. If no one else would speak for Professor Grant, she would. Whatever the cost. And so, a plan began to form in her mind. The next guest lecture would be Aldrich's chance to show off, to bask in the spotlight. But it would also be the perfect opportunity to expose the truth. The question was, how? As Jada began her preparations, she had no idea that the events she was about to set in motion would reverberate far beyond the walls of the math department, challenging the very fabric of Franklin Heights University itself. Jada's mind worked non-stop as she walked through the halls of Franklin Heights University the following week. Every conversation, every glance seemed to hum with an unspoken energy. The knowledge she now carried, that Professor Grant was being quietly forced out of the department's inner circle, burned within her. It was an injustice that had to be brought to light. But the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. She found herself watching Dr. Aldrich more closely. In lectures and meetings, he carried himself with smug ease, a man convinced of his untouchable status. The upcoming lecture series on advanced algorithmic theory had become his latest vanity project. Posters lined the walls of the math building, each one featuring his polished headshot and the grandiose title, Future of Mathematics, A Visionary's Perspective. Jada's own classmates were split. Some idolized Aldrich, eager to bask in the glow of his perceived brilliance. Others, mostly students of color, saw through the facade but felt powerless to speak out. Even among faculty, no one dared challenge him openly. His alliances with the university's top donors and administration insulated him from criticism. But Jada had one advantage no one expected: access to the students. Word traveled fast through study groups, club meetings, and late-night conversations in dorm lounges. Carefully, discreetly, she began to gather stories. Students whispered of times when Professor Grant's proposals for new courses were rejected without explanation, or when his research papers were lost in the department's approval chain. A few graduate students admitted that Grant's applications for grant funding had been buried under red tape, while Aldridge's favored protégés sailed through the process. As the pieces came together, Jada realized this wasn't just about petty rivalry. It was systemic. A deliberate effort to diminish one of the department's most brilliant minds, because he refused to play their political games, and because, in their eyes, he didn't belong at the top. But how to reveal it? The answer came one evening most unexpectedly. Jada was in the student union, attending a workshop on public speaking hosted by an alumni group. One of the speakers, a respected civil rights attorney named Carla Nguyen, spoke about the power of collective voices. Institutions, Carla said, rely on silence. They thrive when those who witness injustice feel alone. But when voices come together, when the truth is made undeniable, change becomes inevitable. The word struck Jada like lightning. She didn't need to confront Aldridge alone. She needed to gather enough voices, enough evidence, to force the truth into the open where it couldn't be ignored. The first step, the guest lecture. The event was scheduled for Friday evening in the Grand Lecture Hall of Harrington Hall. Jada began quietly spreading the word among students and sympathetic faculty. Come to the lecture, she urged. Listen carefully. And be ready. Meanwhile, she dug deeper into university archives and public records. With help from a computer science friend, she uncovered emails from past departmental budget reports, revealing a pattern of inequitable funding. She compiled anonymous statements from students and former staff. The growing stack of evidence filled a thick folder on her desk. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. To truly break through, she needed a voice from within, a respected figure who could lend credibility. And there was only one person who fit that role. Professor Grant. Jada hesitated. She knew he might resist. The man carried himself with quiet dignity, never one to air grievances or seek pity. But perhaps, if approached with care, he would understand the importance of this moment. One evening, she returned to Bean and Birch. The shop was quieter than usual. Professor Grant was closing out the register when she approached. Professor, she began, her voice steady, I need to speak with you. It's important. He looked up, eyes weary but attentive. Of course, Miss Williams. Sit. She explained everything, the whispers, the documents, her plan to gather support for the lecture. When she finished, there was a long silence. Grant gazed at her, his expression unreadable. Miss Williams, he said at last, voice low, I admire your conviction. But this is a dangerous path. The forces you seek to confront, they protect themselves well. I know, Jada replied. But it's wrong, sir. What they've done to you, to this department, it can't continue. And if no one speaks, nothing will change. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or a deep sadness. He sighed softly. You remind me of someone I once knew, he said. Fearless, determined. I had hoped, perhaps the time has come. He rose and extended his hand. Very well, Miss Williams. You have my support. But we must proceed carefully. Together, they outlined a plan. Grant would not confront Aldridge directly, that would only invite retaliation. Instead, he would quietly confirm key details and stand ready to answer questions should the truth emerge. Jada would continue gathering support, ensuring the lecture would be well attended by those willing to listen and speak. As the week unfolded, momentum grew. Students whispered excitedly about the storm coming at Friday's lecture. Sympathetic faculty quietly spread word among their peers. Even a few alumni caught wind and expressed interest in attending. Meanwhile, Dr. Aldrich remained oblivious, basking in the attention surrounding his event. His circle of admirers grew bolder, mocking Grant's coffee shop work with increasing cruelty. Peter Langley, in particular, relished every chance to needle Jada. Looking forward to the lecture, Williams, he sneered in the library one afternoon. Might be educational, for you. Jada met his gaze calmly. Oh, I think we'll all learn something, she replied. Friday evening arrived. The grand hall of Harrington filled quickly, students, faculty, staff, even local media drawn by the buzz. Dr. Aldrich took the stage in his usual polished style, delivering a glowing introduction about mathematics innovation. But as the lecture began, a current of tension hummed beneath the polished veneer. Jada sat near the front, her folder of evidence ready. Around her, dozens of allies waited silently. This was the moment. The truth, long buried, was about to come into the light. The lights dimmed in Harrington Hall, and a hush fell over the audience. On the stage, Dr. Vincent Aldrich stood in an impeccably tailored suit, his image projected onto the large screen behind him. His polished voice rang out across the packed auditorium. Good evening, esteemed colleagues, students, and honored guests. Tonight, we gather to explore the future of mathematics, where brilliance meets innovation. He smiled smugly as polite applause filled the room. Jada sat in the front row, her notebook open but untouched. Her heart pounded, her folder of evidence resting on her lap. Around her, Leah and several trusted classmates exchanged tense glances. They knew what was at stake. Aldrich launched into his lecture, an elaborate display of jargon-heavy slides and polished rhetoric. He spoke of the paradigm shifts and algorithmic frontiers, sprinkling in buzzwords designed to impress. The audience listened attentively, though a few students near the back began whispering. But as the lecture wore on, Jada noticed something telling. The deeper Aldrich delved into complex theories, the thinner his explanations became. Behind the flashy graphics, there was little substance, no groundbreaking ideas, no genuine mathematical insight. It was performance, not scholarship. And that was when the first voice spoke up, from a senior mathematics student named Thomas Green, known for his sharp mind and integrity. Dr. Aldrich, Thomas called out, raising his hand, could you clarify the application of your proposed algorithm in nonlinear optimization? The method you're referencing seems incomplete. A flicker of irritation crossed Aldrich's face. An astute observation, he replied smoothly. Of course, some of these concepts are emerging. Not yet fully formalized. Thomas frowned. But isn't this algorithm based on Professor Grant's earlier work on adaptive convergence? The theorem from his 2012 paper. The room shifted. Heads turned. A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd. Aldrich's smile tightened. Well, he said carefully, many ideas build on prior scholarship. Naturally, there are influences. Jada's breath caught. This was the opening she'd hoped for. Before Aldrich could move on, she rose from her seat. Dr. Aldrich, she said clearly, her voice steady. Are you suggesting your current research builds upon Professor Grant's work? And if so, why was his contribution omitted from your published abstract? The room went still. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. Miss Williams, this is neither the time nor the forum for such accusations. But Jada stood her ground. It's a question of academic integrity, sir. If Professor Grant's work forms the foundation of your theories, shouldn't he receive credit? Murmurs grew louder. Students began pulling out their phones, recording the exchange. Dr. Aldrich's mask of charm began to crack. Young lady, I will not tolerate, another voice interrupted, this time from a tenured faculty member seated near the front. Vincent, the professor said calmly, I would also like to know. I reviewed Professor Grant's 2012 paper extensively. The parallels here are undeniable. Aldridge's composure faltered. Sweat beaded at his temple. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Seizing the moment, Jada stepped forward, holding up her folder. "I have compiled documents," she announced, her voice ringing through the hall. Records of budget manipulation, withheld grant approvals, and multiple instances where Professor Grant's contributions were ignored or buried by this department's leadership. The tension in the room exploded. Students gasped. Faculty exchanged alarmed glances. Several media representatives began filming openly. Aldridge turned pale. "This is outrageous. Baseless. You will regret this." But before he could continue, a calm, resonant voice rose from the back of the hall. "That will be enough, Dr. Aldridge." All eyes turned. Slowly, with quiet dignity, Professor Malcolm Grant stepped into the light, dressed in a simple gray suit. His deep voice carried without effort. "If there are questions of integrity," he said, "I am prepared to answer them." The hall erupted in whispers. For years, Grant had endured quietly, never speaking of the injustices he faced. Now, standing tall before students and colleagues, his presence was undeniable. Aldridge's voice shook. "You, how dare you undermine?" Grant met his gaze evenly. "I undermine nothing. I speak only the truth." The moderator for the event, a respected dean, stood and addressed the crowd. "In light of these serious concerns, this lecture will be paused. We will convene a full inquiry. Students and faculty are invited to submit evidence." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Aldridge, humiliated, gathered his papers and stormed off the stage. But the damage was done. The whispers had become a roar. The truth, long buried, had begun to surface. As the crowd dispersed, many students approached Professor Grant, thanking him for his courage. Others turned to Jada, their eyes shining with admiration. "You did it," Leah whispered, hugging her friend. "You did it." But Jada knew this was only the beginning. The fight was far from over. Powerful forces would not surrender easily. Yet for the first time, the tide had shifted. The university would have to reckon with the truth. The events of Friday night spread through campus like wildfire. By Saturday morning, the entire university was buzzing. Students shared recordings of the confrontation on social media. Anonymous tips flooded the inboxes of the campus newspaper. Professors who had long kept their heads down began murmuring in corridors. For the first time, the unspoken truths of the math department had been dragged into the open. Jada woke to find her phone vibrating non-stop. Messages from classmates, friends, and even alumni poured in. "You were incredible. Thank you for standing up for him. Be careful. They won't let this slide." She knew the last message was the most prescient. When you challenged power at Franklin Heights University, retaliation came swiftly. By Monday, the backlash began. First came the subtle attacks. Her TA assignments were suddenly revoked without explanation. Then came the veiled warnings. Professor Dalton, a longtime Aldridge ally, pulled her aside after class. "Miss Williams," he said with forced concern, "it would be wise to refocus your energies. Certain actions can harm one's academic prospects." Jada met his gaze evenly. "I'm focused on the truth, sir." Dalton frowned. Stubbornness is not always rewarded. Word reached her mother, too. A call came that evening, worried, anxious. "Jada, baby, what's going on?" "I got a call from someone at the university. They said you're getting involved in something dangerous." Jada sighed. "Mama, I'm fine. It's just politics. But I'm not backing down." Her mother's voice trembled. "Just be careful. Promise me." "I promise." Meanwhile, Dr. Aldridge launched his own counterattack. A statement appeared on the university's website, we categorically deny any claims of misconduct. Allegations made during last week's lecture were inflammatory and unfounded. The department remains committed to academic excellence. It was exactly what Jada expected, a polished lie. But the cracks were showing. The university administration, sensing the growing storm, announced the formation of an independent review committee to investigate the matter. The committee included several respected faculty members from outside the math department, as well as a student representative. To Jada's surprise, they asked her to participate. "You are at the center of this," the committee chair told her. "We need your voice." It was a dangerous honor. But she accepted. She couldn't back down now, not after coming this far. At the first committee meeting, Jada presented her evidence, meticulously organized documents, sworn statements from students, and public records of departmental funding patterns. The room grew tense as the committee members absorbed the scope of what she had uncovered. When she finished, the chair looked somber. "This is significant. We will proceed carefully." Meanwhile, Professor Grant remained the embodiment of quiet strength. Though the attacks against him intensified, anonymous emails, cold shoulders from former colleagues, he continued to teach with unwavering dedication. His lectures, if anything, grew even more brilliant, drawing larger and larger crowds. One afternoon, after class, he pulled Jada aside. "You are doing well, Miss Williams," he said quietly. "But remember, truth is a long game. They will seek to wear you down. You must endure." "I won't quit, sir," Jada replied. He smiled faintly. "I know." But the pressure mounted. Jada noticed that students once friendly to her now avoided eye contact. Rumors swirled, false claims that she had fabricated evidence, that she was trying to tear down the department. The worst came from Peter Langley. One evening, as she left the library, he blocked her path. "You've made a big mistake, Williams," he sneered. "You think the university cares about someone like you? They'll chew you up." Jada stared him down. "I care about the truth. That's enough." Peter's smile faded. "We'll see." The confrontation only strengthened her resolve. But she wasn't naive. She knew the fight ahead would be brutal. Leah and a few trusted friends rallied around her, offering support. "You're not alone," Leah said firmly. "We've got your back." By the second week, the media picked up the story. Local news outlets began asking questions. An investigative reporter from the city paper reached out, wanting an interview. Jada hesitated. Grant's words echoed in her mind, "Proceed carefully." After discussing it with him, she agreed on one condition. "I'll speak," she told the reporter. "But this story isn't about me. It's about systemic injustice. About how a brilliant black professor was silenced." The article, published days later, sent shockwaves through campus. Under the headline, "Buried Genius: How Franklin Heights University Failed Professor Malcolm Grant," the piece detailed the evidence, the systemic bias, and the culture of silence that had allowed it to happen. Students rallied. A petition circulated, demanding accountability. A march was organized in support of Grant and for broader reforms. And still, Aldridge clung to power, refusing to step down. But his grip was slipping. At the next committee session, the tone was different. The chair opened with a blunt statement. "The evidence continues to grow. We will not be rushed. But justice will be done." Jada left the meeting exhausted but hopeful. For the first time, it felt possible that truth might finally prevail. But deep down, she knew the fight was not over. The forces protecting Aldridge were powerful, and they would not go down without a fight. The coming weeks would test her strength, her endurance, and her belief that one voice, when joined by many, could truly change a broken system. By the third week of the inquiry, the walls of Franklin Heights University seemed to pulse with tension. Every corridor, every faculty lounge, every student forum buzzed with the same questions: would Aldridge survive this scandal? Would the university hold him accountable? And would Professor Grant finally receive the recognition he deserved? For Jada, the weight of it all pressed down harder each day. She juggled classes, committee meetings, and constant interviews. Her inbox overflowed with messages, some supportive, others openly hostile. She heard whispers of faculty meetings where her name came up in scornful tones. Peter Langley and his crowd had grown louder, spreading false narratives that she was tearing the department apart for her own ambition. But the true test came from higher up. Late one afternoon, Jada was summoned to a meeting with Vice Provost Harriet Langstrom, one of the university's senior administrators. The email was polite but firm, "Please come to my office at 4 p.m. to discuss ongoing developments." Jada arrived at the provost's office, nerves taut. The space was sleek and cold, glass walls, modern furniture, and towering bookshelves filled with untouched academic tomes. Langstrom sat behind a large mahogany desk, flanked by 2 legal advisors. "Miss Williams," she greeted coolly. "Please, sit." Jada complied, chin high. She would not be intimidated. Langstrom laced her fingers. "You are aware, I trust, of the gravity of the situation you've created." Jada held her gaze. "I'm aware of the gravity of the truth that's been uncovered." A flicker of irritation crossed Langstrom's face. "Be that as it may, the university's reputation is now at risk. Alumni are calling. Donors are expressing concerns. I'm not responsible for what's been done to Professor Grant," Jada replied calmly. "Only for bringing it to light." Langstrom sighed, as though speaking to a child. "Miss Williams, the university values passionate students. But passion without prudence can be destructive. I urge you to consider your future here. Continued disruption could have consequences for your academic standing." The veiled threat was clear. Jada's pulse quickened, but she met Langstrom's gaze unwavering. "With respect, ma'am, I intend to graduate with my head high. And if standing up for what's right is seen as disruption, so be it." Langstrom's expression hardened. "You are dismissed." As Jada left the office, her heart pounded. The pressure was real, and growing. They wanted her silenced. But instead of fear, she felt a burning resolve. She texted Leah immediately. "They tried to warn me off. It's worse than we thought." Leah replied, "We've got your back. They won't scare us." That night, the student petition surpassed 5,000 signatures. Flyers for the upcoming march covered every bulletin board on campus. Faculty allies quietly offered words of encouragement. But the real surprise came the next morning. Professor Grant, usually reserved in public, issued a rare open statement to the campus newspaper. "For too long, I have remained silent in the face of injustice, not out of weakness, but out of belief in the institution I serve. Yet recent events make clear that silence only enables wrongdoing. I stand with those who seek truth and integrity, and I welcome the inquiry now underway." The message sent shockwaves through the university. Students quoted it on social media. Even faculty who had previously stayed quiet began voicing cautious support. Meanwhile, Aldridge scrambled to salvage his position. He issued defensive memos, held private meetings with donors, and pushed back hard against the committee's progress. But with every move, he seemed more desperate, less the untouchable figure he had once been. Jada attended the next inquiry session with renewed determination. The committee's evidence files had grown thick, and their questions had grown sharper. The chair made it clear that a reckoning was coming. Still, the opposition fought back. A smear article appeared anonymously on a campus gossip blog, filled with lies about Jada's motives. Photos from her social media were twisted out of context. The attacks were crude, but meant to rattle her. Leah and her friends closed ranks around her. They walked with her between classes, monitored her email for harassment, and helped spread truthful counternarratives. "You're not alone," Leah reminded her. "We're in this together." Jada nodded. But in quiet moments, the weight of it all pressed down. Her grades were slipping from exhaustion. Sleep was elusive. And the constant scrutiny took a toll. One evening, as she sat in Bean and Birch with a stack of notes, Professor Grant approached her table. "You carry a heavy burden," he said gently. "But you carry it well." Jada looked up, weariness in her eyes. "Some days, it feels impossible." Grant's gaze softened. "Change often feels that way, until it happens. You have already done more than many twice your age. Hold steady." His quiet confidence bolstered her. In that moment, Jada understood, this wasn't just about exposing Aldrich. It was about reshaping a broken culture, one that had long marginalized voices like hers and Grant's. The march was now just days away. Momentum was building. Students from across disciplines pledged to attend. Faculty allies planned to join. The media were prepared to cover it. And somewhere deep inside the math department, Aldrich must have known, the tide was turning. But the fight was not over. The most dangerous moves were yet to come. The morning of the march dawned gray and cold, the skies heavy with unspoken tension. Jada stood in her dorm room, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were tired, but steady. She pulled on her Franklin Heights hoodie and wrapped her long braids into a neat bun. Today wasn't about appearance, it was about truth. About standing with Professor Grant, and with every student who had ever been silenced or dismissed. Outside, the campus buzzed with activity. Volunteers were setting up at the main quad. Signs reading "Justice for Professor Grant," "End Academic Bias," and "Truth over Politics" dotted the lawns. Social media streams were alive with posts about the march, students sharing their reasons for showing up. By 10 a.m., the crowd was already growing. Students from every department gathered: mathematics, history, English, political science, and engineering. Faculty trickled in, too, some quietly, others openly wearing pins in support. Even alumni had returned to campus, drawn by the growing national attention. Jada arrived with Leah and a small group of fellow math students. As they approached the quad, a wave of emotion hit her. Hundreds of people were gathered already. The air thrummed with energy, not just anger, but hope. Determination. Leah squeezed her shoulder. "Look what you started." Jada shook her head. "What we started?" At the center of the quad, a makeshift stage had been erected. Several student leaders and faculty allies were slated to speak. Jada was one of them. Her name had been added to the list after the inquiry committee publicly acknowledged the strength of her evidence. As she waited her turn, Jada spotted Professor Grant standing near the edge of the crowd, dressed in his usual understated style. He wasn't seeking the spotlight, but his presence spoke volumes. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of pride. The speeches began. One by one, students and professors spoke out against the systemic injustices that had allowed Aldrich's abuses to go unchecked. They spoke not just for Grant, but for all who had been marginalized: students of color, first-generation scholars, anyone who had been told they didn't belong. Finally, Jada's name was called. She stepped onto the stage, heart pounding. The crowd quieted. She gripped the microphone, her voice clear. "When I first stood up at that lecture," she began, "I was scared. I was afraid no one would listen. That the truth would be buried again." A wave of murmured agreement swept the crowd. "But I was wrong. You're here. All of you. And that means something is changing." She held up a copy of her compiled evidence. "This isn't just about one professor. It's about an entire system that rewards arrogance and punishes integrity. That tells brilliant black minds like Professor Grant's they should stay silent, stay small." Her voice rose. "We say, no more." The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones captured every word. The march was no longer just a campus event, it had become a national story. As the speeches ended, the crowd moved into the march itself, circling the math building and the administrative offices. Chants echoed through the air, "Justice for Grant." End the silence. Truth over titles. Inside the math building, faculty watched through windows. Some looked uneasy. Others nodded in quiet solidarity. But in the provost's office, Langstrom and Aldrich met behind closed doors, their expressions grim. The pressure was mounting, and they knew it. The march concluded back at the quad, where students gathered in a sea of determination. Reporters from the city newspaper and local TV outlets swarmed the crowd. Jada gave a brief interview, her message simple: this is about integrity. About valuing every voice. The university must do better. And we won't stop until it does. As the crowd began to disperse, Jada finally let herself breathe. The exhaustion of the past weeks weighed on her, but beneath it was a fierce sense of hope. Leah hugged her tightly. "You did it. Whatever happens next, you've already changed this place." Jada smiled, though she knew the battle wasn't over. The inquiry was still underway. Aldrich still held his position, for now. And behind the scenes, powerful forces would do everything they could to protect him. But the tide had turned. No matter what came next, the truth was out. And the university could never pretend otherwise again. Later that evening, as the campus quieted, Jada received an unexpected message from the inquiry committee chair: "Major developments. Please attend tomorrow's session. Professor Grant will be present as well." Jada stared at the message, adrenaline spiking. Something was shifting. Perhaps the final reckoning was closer than anyone had dared hope. She texted Leah, "tomorrow. It's happening." And with that, she prepared herself for what could be the decisive moment in their long fight for justice. Tuesday dawned bright and sharp, sunlight streaming over the campus of Franklin Heights University. But beneath the clear sky, the air felt charged, thick with expectation. Word had spread fast after the march: the inquiry committee had reached a critical juncture. Today's session might well decide Aldrich's fate. Jada arrived at the administration building early, her folder of documents clutched tight. Leah met her at the entrance, her expression tense. "You ready?" Leah asked. "As I'll ever be," Jada replied. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The committee chamber, a stately old room lined with dark oak, was already filling with observers, student representatives, faculty members, a few alumni, and more than one reporter from the city press. All eyes were on the long table at the front, where the committee members sat, their expressions serious. At one end of the room, Professor Grant stood with quiet dignity, dressed in a dark suit, a simple tie knotted neatly at his throat. When Jada entered, he gave her a slight nod, a wordless gesture of solidarity. She took her seat beside him. Moments later, Dr. Vincent Aldrich swept into the room, flanked by two attorneys. He looked paler than usual, and the confident gleam in his eyes had dimmed. Gone was the easy arrogance, replaced by a brittle edge of defensiveness. The chair of the inquiry committee, Professor Elaine Porter, a respected mathematician from another university, called the session to order. "Today," she said, her voice firm, "we will hear final statements regarding the allegations of academic misconduct, bias, and systemic marginalization within the Department of Mathematics. This committee has reviewed extensive evidence over the past several weeks. The facts before us are troubling." A murmur rippled through the room. Professor Porter continued. "We will first hear from Professor Malcolm Grant." All eyes turned to Grant. Slowly, he rose, unfolding his tall frame with quiet grace. When he spoke, his deep voice resonated through the chamber. "For many years," Grant began, "I devoted myself to this institution. I believed in the ideals of scholarship, mentorship, and integrity. Yet over time, I witnessed those ideals eroded, not by lack of talent among students, but by ambition without ethics among certain colleagues." He glanced briefly at Aldrich, who shifted uncomfortably. Public recognition was withheld. Funding was quietly redirected. "My contributions to mathematical theory," used by others, went uncredited. Through it all, I chose silence, believing that my work would speak for itself. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. But silence allows injustice to flourish. And so I speak now, not for my sake, but for every student who must fight twice as hard to be heard. For every young scholar told they do not belong. And for those who will come after. He returned to his seat. The room was hushed. Even Aldrich looked shaken. Next, the committee called Jada to the stand. Heart pounding, she stepped forward. "My name is Jada Williams," she began. "I am a sophomore mathematics major. I never intended to become the center of this. I only wanted to learn. But when I saw what was happening to Professor Grant, when I saw how truth was being buried, I knew I had to speak." She held up her folder. "This is the evidence I gathered. Not because I had any special power, but because I had to. Because no one else would." Her voice strengthened. "This isn't about just one professor. It's about every time a black student or professor is dismissed, diminished, or denied opportunity. It's about a system that rewards politics over merit. And it's about what we, this university, choose to value." She looked directly at the committee. "I'm asking you to choose truth." The room erupted in quiet applause, faculty, students, even some administrators. Aldrich's lead attorney rose next, launching into a defensive argument, claims of misunderstanding, academic freedom, and administrative discretion. But the words rang hollow. Finally, Professor Porter addressed Aldrich directly. "Dear Aldrich," she said evenly, "the evidence is substantial. Multiple instances of misappropriated credit, withheld funding, and targeted marginalization have been documented. Furthermore, the tone and content of communications reviewed by this committee indicate a pattern of bias inconsistent with this university's values." She paused. "It is the committee's recommendation that you be removed from your position as department chair, with further disciplinary action pending." The chamber erupted, gasps, murmurs, scattered applause. Aldrich stood abruptly, face flushed. "This is outrageous. I demand an appeal," but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide in the room. The committee had spoken. The reckoning had come. As the session adjourned, reporters rushed forward. Students hugged in the corridors. And at the center of it all, Jada found herself standing beside Professor Grant. "You did this," Leah whispered, eyes bright with pride. But Grant shook his head gently. "She did it for all of us," he said. He turned to Jada. "Whatever comes next, know that you have already changed this place." And in that moment, surrounded by a sea of voices lifted in truth, Jada knew, they were only beginning. In the days following the inquiry's ruling, Franklin Heights University was a campus transformed. Word spread quickly, Dr. Aldrich was to be formally removed as chair of the math department, pending final approval from the Board of Trustees. He had retreated from public view, absent from his lectures and offices, his former allies distancing themselves with practiced silence. For Jada, life had shifted in ways both exhilarating and exhausting. Strangers stopped her on campus to offer thanks. Professors she had never spoken to now nodded respectfully in the halls. The university newspaper ran a front-page editorial titled, "One Voice, Many Truths, How Jada Williams Helped Spark Change." But the weight of it all still pressed on her shoulders. Her inbox remained flooded, some messages glowing with praise, others brimming with resentment. There were those, after all, who saw her actions not as courage but as defiance. And while Aldrich's public fall had begun, the deeper systems that enabled him remained intact. The work was far from done. Late one afternoon, as she sat reviewing her notes in Bean and Birch, Professor Grant approached her table. He looked as composed as ever, though there was a new ease in his step, a man no longer forced to carry his dignity alone. "Miss Williams," he greeted warmly. "May I?" "Of course, Professor," she replied, closing her notebook. He sat across from her. "How are you holding up?" Jada hesitated. "I'm tired. Grateful. But tired. Grant's gaze was understanding. Change often exacts a price. You've borne it well. She smiled faintly. It's not over. There's still so much to fix. There always will be, he said. But never doubt, you have opened a door many believed was sealed. They spoke quietly for a while, the cafe bustling softly around them. Jada learned that Grant had received an outpouring of support from former students, colleagues across the country, and national academic groups now pressuring the university to address broader inequities. You've not only stood for me, he told her, but for every student and scholar who will walk these halls after us. Later that week, the Board of Trustees convened for an emergency session. The pressure from media, students, and alumni had grown undeniable. Their ruling was swift, effective immediately. Dr. Vincent Aldrich is removed from his post as chair of the Department of Mathematics. An external review of departmental practices will proceed, with recommendations for structural reform to follow. The announcement electrified the campus. Students gathered on the quad in spontaneous celebration. A new wave of petitions demanded deeper reforms, mandatory bias training for faculty, transparent funding practices, and a permanent advisory council for marginalized students. Jada, though weary, attended the gathering with Leah. You started something, Leah said, grinning. We started something, Jada corrected. And we're going to finish it. Amid the crowd, Professor Grant appeared, this time surrounded by students eager to hear him speak. He stepped onto a bench, commanding quiet with his presence alone. This is not the end, he said, voice rich and steady. It is a beginning. You, each of you, have shown that truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. I am honored to stand with you. Let us move forward, not in bitterness, but in purpose. The cheers that followed echoed across the quad. That evening, as campus lights glowed under a clear sky, Jada sat alone on the library steps. The adrenaline of the past weeks was finally giving way to exhaustion. But beneath it, a quiet pride bloomed. She had not set out to be a leader. She had not sought attention. She had only wanted justice, for a brilliant professor forced to serve coffee when he should have been celebrated. Now, the university has changed. Not fixed, not yet, but undeniably changed. Her phone buzzed with a new message, from the Inquiry Committee chair. Miss Williams, we would like to invite you to serve on the Permanent Reform Council. Your voice is essential as we move forward. Jada smiled. Slowly, she typed her reply, I accept. We've only just begun. And somewhere across campus, in a quiet cafe preparing for another evening shift, Professor Malcolm Grant surely knew, a new chapter had begun, for both of them, and for Franklin Heights University. Spring arrived early at Franklin Heights University that year. The cold winds of winter gave way to crisp mornings and sunlit afternoons, and with them came a new energy on campus, a sense of possibility, of long-awaited change. It had been 2 months since Dr. Aldrich's removal, and though the university still bore the scars of the scandal, something deeper was shifting. The Permanent Reform Council had begun its work in earnest. For the first time, students, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, had real seats at the table. Faculty were now required to attend comprehensive training on bias and equity. Funding transparency measures were being drafted, and the culture of unchecked arrogance in the math department was being slowly, methodically dismantled. Jada had found herself in the center of this transformation. As one of the student members of the council, her days were now filled with meetings, drafting proposals, and listening to the stories of others who, like her, had once been silenced. It wasn't easy. There were still voices pushing back, still those who resented her role in exposing the rot beneath the university's polished surface. But Jada had grown stronger. The experience had forged a steel within her that no amount of academic condescension could bend. She maintained her studies, though the past months had taken their toll on her grades. Professor Grant had offered quiet encouragement, reminding her that perseverance mattered more than perfection. You have already passed the greater test, he had told her one afternoon, as they met for tea at Bean and Birch. And your work now, this will shape the future far more than any grade. Grant himself had been reinstated to full standing in the department, his pay restored, and his voice amplified. More than that, his long-ignored contributions were now being cited openly, his name finally spoken with the respect it deserved. Yet, as always, he remained humble. When a group of students gathered to ask him to speak at an upcoming academic conference, he simply said, "If my presence serves the cause of truth, I will stand." One bright April morning, Jada arrived early for the council's weekly meeting. The agenda was ambitious, finalizing new protocols for grant allocations, revising hiring practices, and establishing a mentorship program to support Black students in STEM fields. As she settled into her seat, her phone buzzed with a message from Leah. "Girl, did you see the university website?" Curious, Jada opened the site. Her breath caught. There, on the homepage, was an announcement. The Board of Trustees is proud to establish the Professor Malcolm Grant Fellowship in Mathematical Excellence, a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing mathematics, named in honor of Professor Grant's enduring contributions to the field and the university community. Tears pricked Jada's eyes. She glanced up as the other council members arrived. Several of them had seen the news too, their faces lit with pride. When Professor Grant himself entered the room, late as usual but with his usual composed grace, the council rose in unison. The spontaneous, heartfelt applause that followed. He held up a hand, modest as always. "I am honored," he said quietly. "But remember, this is not my victory. It is ours. And there is more work to do." After the meeting, as the sun warmed the stone steps outside the building, Jada and Grant stood side by side, looking out over the campus. "You've changed this place," Grant said softly. "So have you, Professor." He glanced at her, eyes warm. "Perhaps. But your voice carried where mine could not. You reminded this university of its better self." Jada smiled. "We reminded them." He chuckled. "Fair enough." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Jada spoke again. "You know, when I first saw you in that coffee shop, I didn't understand. I thought, how could someone like you be forced into that?" He nodded. "Sometimes, dignity means enduring. Other times, it means standing up. You helped me remember the difference." Jada looked out over the green, students bustling to and from classes, the air alive with spring's promise. "We're not done, are we?" Grant shook his head. "Change is an infinite equation. But you've solved the first part. The rest, well, we will tackle it together." Jada smiled, heart full. Together. And with that, they stepped forward, professor and student, mentor and scholar, not into an ending, but into a new beginning. A future still to be written. A university still to be transformed. One truth, one voice, at a time. Dear friend, this isn't just a story about a professor or a student. It's a story about standing up for what's right, even when the system is against you. It reminds us that one voice, no matter how small, can echo across institutions, spark change, and inspire others to rise. Injustice often hides behind titles and polished reputations, but truth has a power that can't be silenced. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, because together, we can keep sharing stories that matter, stories that lift voices that need to be heard. Let's keep learning, growing, and standing for justice, one story at a time.